Hi, this week's China Book Club is on Not Your China Doll, a biography of Anna May Wong by Katie Salisbury. So, Anna May Wong was the first Asian American Hollywood movie star. So, when she was just a teenager, she played a Mongolian slave in The Thief of Bagdad, which was one of the biggest productions of the 1920s, and the lead actor was Douglas Fairbanks. And Fairbanks, along with his wife, Mary Pickford, were probably the two most famous people in human history up to that point, considering how their names echoed around the continents. So I'm just going to read a few passages from the book to give you an idea of why this 400-page tome is well worth your time. So here's a brief quote on page 84, in which Anna May Wong says in an interview, "Do not think it is easy for me to throw over the traditions and customs of my people. I have behind me countless centuries of Chinese ancestors who have unquestioningly obeyed the rules laid down for them by their ancestors. No people revere their parents as do the Chinese. The father's word is law in the household, never to be disputed. The Chinese child is born with ages of superstitious belief traditions in his blood. It is no light thing to cast them all aside in one generation, believe me. Sometimes, when I have defied my father, who is the kindest, gentlest man alive, I have gone off by myself and wondered if, after all, I was in the right. I have wondered where my course will lead me." So Anna May Wong, her parents were in the laundry business, as was very common for Chinese Americans in the early 20th century, and their parents had come over to San Francisco during the gold rush, and by this point they were in Southern California. But it was not much of a secret that her father wanted her to be a boy, but he got a girl in the end, and a girl who went against the family tradition and became an actress. But eventually she made her family proud. On page 110 of this hardback copy is a quote from the essayist Walter Benjamin, who wrote some highly important essays from the first half of the 20th century and was one of the most important thinkers of his time. So, as Anna May loosened her hair with her immaculately manicured fingers, stroking and restyling the fringe across her forehead, Benjamin no doubt caught a thrill. "Everything that is courageous and dear seems to be reflected in her eyes. I know I'll see her again," Benjamin predicted, "in a film that may resemble the fabric of our dialogue, of which I say in the words of the author of the Yu Kiao Liu, the fabric was divinely draped, but the face was even finer." So that was observed during her few months in Germany at the end of the 1920s, when she made a couple of films, and she met and befriended Marlene Dietrich and Leni Riefenstahl, two women who both became phenomenally famous for very different reasons. In her native country of America, Anna May Wong, of course, encountered a lot of racism. There were still miscegenation laws in place, and films could not legally show an interracial couple ending up together. When she went to London and Berlin at the end of the 1920s, she encountered still a lot of prejudice, but a kind of different category of racism. And there she befriended the singer Paul Robeson. And here is just a very brief observation about the way the two people were treated. Paul, like Anna May, knew what it was like to be typecast, and to nonetheless say yes to such stereotypical roles for the small push forward they might engender. They were both actors of colour, which bonded them in a certain respect, as they would soon discover. If Anna May Wong was the China doll, and by turns the Dragon Lady, then Paul Robeson was the magical Negro of legend, exceptional in every way. So Paul Robeson was physically, intellectually and mentally a very impressive person, but being from the US at that time, he was still a second-class citizen and treated as such. Despite her achievements in the entertainment industry and being a pioneer as a Chinese American woman, none of this is to say that China was particularly proud of her or appreciated her in her own lifetime. So Shanghai Express, which was one of her greatest roles in the early 1930s, just before the Hays Code was introduced, was criticised in a Chinese publication called Pictorial Weekly because the film was deemed to offer a unflattering portrait of China, and the person who was mostly blamed was not the director, Joseph von Sternberg, or the lead star, Marlene Dietrich, but Anna May Wong, because she was Chinese American. So this is what they wrote about her. The Oriental star in Hollywood, Anna May Wong, is working as a featured player in America. Her specialty is to expose the conduct of the very low class of Chinese, such as when she played the part of a half-nude Chinese maid in The Thief of Bagdad. Although she is deficient in artistic portrayal, she has done more than enough to disgrace the Chinese race. Is there such a thing as a half-nude maid in China? The film was banned in China before it had the chance to debut in America. Anna May Wong never married or had children. The closest probably she came was with the Englishman Eric Maschwitz, the author and musician. But this is an observation that Anna May made after one particularly painful goodbye. "We don't know how to live properly," said Anna May, looking plush in a red velvet housecoat. "Lately, as I've looked over my possessions, I've thought, why do we cling to useless things? For the matter of that, why do we cling to useless thoughts and to useless people? That last is a hard thing to say, I know, but isn't it true?" In this moment of personal reckoning, Anna May wondered whether she had wasted her time on all the wrong things: material gain, fame and prestige, people who were merely attracted by her celebrity, men who could never fully reciprocate or commit to her love. She pledged to rid her life of useless things and useless people, but most of all, she expressed a desire to rid her mind of useless thoughts. So there are lots of great things to take out of this book. One is the number of absolutely extraordinary people who she met and befriended, including the scholars Hu Shi, Lien Yu Tang, Paul Robeson, as already mentioned, Marlene Dietrich, who she allegedly was lovers with, but was certainly very good friends with. Obviously, massive superstars like Myrna Loy, and a good few dozen pages of the book are dedicated to the production of The Good Earth, an adaptation of the Pearl Book novel Da Di, which was released in 1937 and is set in China but made in Hollywood. In the end, the lead female role was played by a Caucasian actress, which, of course, according to today's values, it should certainly have been played by a Chinese actress, and the only one who was qualified for the job at the time was Anna May Wong. To get an idea of just how what the racial politics were like at the time, on page 347 of this hardback copy, it mentions that in Time magazine they ran an article back in the early 1940s titled "How to Tell Japs from the Chinese." Wow. And the differences they mention include: the Chinese have a parchment yellow complexion, while the Japanese man was said to have an earthly yellow complexion, and so on. So as far as we have to go when it comes to anti-racism, we've definitely come a long way. And another takeaway is just how perishable everything is, because so many of the people who she met were super famous in their own lifetime, like Douglas Fairbanks, but many of those names would draw blank stares today. And the TV series she made on page 359, it mentions she played the lead. Anna May Wong played the lead in Madame Liu Song, which so the first Asian American led television series, and it came and went without a wink of recognition, and sadly no copy of it even exists, because when the studio went out of business, the tapes were dumped into the upper New York Bay. So even people who you think will leave a massive legacy could very well be forgotten very soon. But The last quote I want to read out from this book is from right at the end, and it includes a quote from Albert Camus. "The only way to deal with an unfree world," Albert Camus wrote in his novel The Stranger, sometimes named The Outsider, "is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." Anna May Wong, it seems, embodied that ethos and wore it like a badge of honor. Her presence in Hollywood, no matter how many times they tried to push her out or shut her down, was itself an act of resistance. And sadly, before starting filming what would have been her big comeback role in 1961, a musical called The Flower Drum Song, which almost became the first major Hollywood production with an entirely Asian cast, she died of a heart attack in her sleep, sadly, and still only in her 50s at the time. But she pioneered Asian American inclusion in Hollywood, which enabled subsequent successes like The Joy Luck Club, which came out in the 90s, and Crazy Rich Asians, which came out in 2018, for example, to be the successes they are. So she is, of all the Hollywood movie stars of the 1920s and 30s, she is one of the few who's probably more respected now than she was in her own time, which is quite a legacy to have. I enthusiastically recommend this book, and I expect it will be out in paperback in the next year or two.